Hey friends, it's Sarah from She's Crafty and She Knows It, and today we're going to make some really pretty pressed flower epoxy resin coasters. Now, like with any resin craft, you want to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated room, you're wearing safety goggles, gloves, and a respirator. So let's go ahead and get started. I have all my supplies laid out right here. This is the epoxy resin that we're going to be using. Like always, I will link all the supplies I'm using in the description below this video. For this epoxy resin, you do a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to pour the resin here and the hardener in here, just the same amount. So I'm going to make sure these cups kind of have little lines inside. So I'm just going to use the lines as a guide. So we're going to do equal parts resin and hardener, and then we're going to mix it together in another cup and stir it up. Now when we're stirring, we're going to stir it really slow. I'm going to use a little tongue depressor wood stick like this, and I'm going to stir it really slow for about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back when everything's stirred up so we can go ahead and start pouring. Now when you're mixing it, you want to start in the center, go slow in one direction, and then slowly kind of widen how you're stirring it. You do not want to switch directions, and you don't want to stir it really quickly. If you switch directions and you start whipping it up really fast, it's just going to add air and bubbles to the mixture. So we're going to stir for about 5 minutes. I know it sounds like a long time, but you really want to stir it and make sure it's mixed together really well. Okay, now that it's mixed together really well, we're going to go ahead and pour it in 2 of the little coaster molds I have. I'm going to pour it filling up a little bit on the bottom. I don't even need to fill up halfway. I just want to fill enough to kind of cover the bottom a little bit. So it's up to you if you want to fill it a fourth or a half. And then I'm going to come back on a little bit and put a layer of the pressed flowers, and then we can pour more on top of that. And now if you're noticing a lot of bubbles, you can definitely use a heat gun or a lighter to kind of hold a flame near the top of the surface, and it'll kind of warm it up and bring the bubbles to the top and help them to pop. Okay, now when it comes to using a lighter or a heat gun to pop those bubbles, just be really careful about having the heat gun or the lighter too close to the edge of the rubber mold. So if you're holding it in one place for a long time near the rubber, it could make the rubber melt. Just trust me on this one. I've been there, done that. So just be really careful. If it melts the rubber mold, it will kind of melt into the resin and get really stuck to it and be on the side or stuck into the middle of your coaster. So just don't hold it too close for too long on the edge of the mold. Okay, so it's been about 45 to 60 minutes. The resin has hardened a little bit. It's not obviously all the way hard, but it's hard enough for me to set the pressed flowers on top of it without them just sinking to the bottom. That way they'll kind of stay on a layer in the middle of the coaster, which is where we want them. So I'm gonna go ahead, set the pressed flowers where I want them on the coaster, mix up more epoxy resin, and then pour it on top of the pressed flowers, completely filling up the mold. So this is the last layer of the epoxy resin. And then we're going to let it sit overnight. I'm going to give it a full 24 hours to cure before taking them out of the mold. Now, like I said earlier, I will link all the supplies I'm using, including the pressed flowers, in the description below this video. But of course, you can use any color, any type of pressed flower. Now, I'm doing the flowers facing up, just so you know. That way I can kind of see how they're arranged. Helps me kind of decide how I want them to look a little bit better. Now, you don't want them going up the sides, because then they might kind of stick a little bit out of the resin. So I go towards the border, but I don't really touch the border of the actual mold, if that makes sense. Okay, so since these pressed flowers are really lightweight, they're probably going to try to rise up to the top of the resin. This is totally normal, so don't let it stress you out. It happens sometimes with lightweight things. If this happens, it doesn't bother me. It's fine as long as it doesn't poke through the resin. If it comes and pokes through the top of the resin, when it hardens, it's going to look really goofy, and you're going to have a pressed flower actually sticking out of the hard coaster, and it'll look weird. So we don't want that to happen. So if a pressed flower comes up and kind of sticks out the top layer of the resin, I just use the side of a toothpick to kind of push the flower back down under the resin, and then that way the resin can come over it and kind of fill that layer. When you do this, just so you know, it might cause new bubbles to come up to the top. So let those bubbles come up. If they're big bubbles and they're bothering you, go ahead and use a lighter or a heat gun to kind of pop them, just like we did earlier with the first layer, and then you should be good to go. Now this might happen over and over again. So sometimes it's the same flower that's super lightweight that just wants to keep coming to the top. And so you'll have to kind of sit there and check it every 5 to 10 minutes, but it only lasts for like a 30 to 45 minute period of time when it's like the working time. They consider it the working time when the resin's more like pliable and moldable and you can kind of mess around with it. So during that time, the flowers might still be able to come to the top and you'll have to push them back down. So I just come back, check every 10 minutes, come back and do it a few times, And then after that working time's over, which for me in my house, it depends on like weather and all these specific things for how long the working time is. For me, it's about 30 minutes. So I come back 3 times every 10 minutes, make sure they're good, push them back down if I need to, pop bubbles if I need to. And then after that, it's kind of starting to harden enough that it's keeping the flowers where they are. You don't have to worry about it. Now, if that stresses you out, if you don't want to have to push the flowers back down, or you don't like how they look when they're kind of rising to the top, so like when these are going to be finished, the flowers are going to be a little bit in different layers, which I think looks really cool from the top and the side. If you want your flowers all on one layer, you don't want them kind of rising, you don't want to worry about pushing them down, you can fix this by doing 3 layers. So you would do the same first layer that we did, then you'd come put your pressed flowers and then pour a really thin layer. So a thinner layer than the first, or maybe equal, depends how much you did your first layer. Do a thin layer, just enough to cover the flowers, and then I would let that harden for way longer, 8 hours, 12 hours. You could even do the full 24, let it harden up. Then come back, mix a third layer, and completely fill the mold. That way you know that that third layer is really covering all the flowers. You don't have to worry about them coming to the top or anything. The only reason I do 2 layers instead of 3 is just to save time. If you do the 3 layers, it just takes a lot more time because you have to wait for that second layer to fully cure, and then you have to go ahead and mix a third layer, wait for the third layer to cure. It just adds a lot of time. Depending on your schedule and your work schedule, all that stuff, it can add a full day for me. And I'm usually making these coasters kind of last minute as a gift. I don't want to wait that long. I'd rather do more work on the front end, kind of checking it for that 30 minutes, pushing the flowers down, and then being done. So I can kind of get them completely done in a day, let them sit overnight, and it's just a really fast project. So totally up to you. I just kind of wanted to lay it out. I don't want anybody to be shocked by the flowers kind of rising up in the resin or anything. But like always, if you have any questions, just comment below with your questions and I'll try to answer them the best I can. Okay, so it's been about 24 hours. I'm gonna go ahead and take them out of the mold. So here's a super close look at it so you can really see how it turned out. It just turned out so pretty. And like how I was talking about earlier, since I only did 2 layers and the flowers were kind of rising up through the resin as it was drying, there's just different layers of flowers in there. Hopefully you can kind of see. Some of them are kind of tilted on their side. Some are higher up in the resin versus lower in the resin, which just adds so much interest and kind of movement to the coaster. I really love how it turned out. Like I said, I will link all the supplies I use in the description below this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for more videos. Bye!
She's crafty and she knows it. She's crafty and she knows it. She's crafty and she knows. She's crafty and she knows it.